Welcome back, passengers, to Long Walk Talks Lost. This is your captain speaking. My name is David Hensley. I'm the owner and creative director of Long Walk Productions, and I am joined today by my two co-pilots,
Cara Hayes,
Robert Bradford.
And while we are in between seasons of Lost, we are going to be branching out a little bit. We have decided that between seasons, what we're going to do is we're going to pick an actor, and we're going to discuss a movie that they were in around the time that Lost was airing. So in this case, if you've listened to previous episodes, you know the movie and the actor that we picked is Brick, featuring Emilie de Ravin, who played Claire on Lost. And Brick, I think, is one of the most interesting feature films made in recent memory. It is a film noir detective story set entirely in a high school.
It turns 20 next year, is what's kind of mind-blowing.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you. I hate that. Oh, that's okay. Lost turned 20 this year, so we're all on that same depression. Time won't stop slipping into the future train.
Sure won't.
Up there with Memento is just like a grand slam of a debut for a director who's had a pretty amazing career since. I know Memento wasn't actually Christopher Nolan's first feature. He did Following, but Memento was his first big theatrical release.
Mm-hmm. Which is a movie that we have discussed on Long Walk Talks previously when we did our Perfect Tens discussion with me and Chris and Stan. So you can go back and hear my thoughts on Memento as well. That should still be streaming on YouTube, I believe. But anyway, Rian Johnson and Brick, the director of Knives Out and The Last Jedi, Glass Onion, this is his first feature film. And just before we dive into like discussion topics, what were our overall thoughts about the movie? I know, Cara, this was your first time seeing it.
Yes.
So what were your general thoughts about it?
What the fuck? I spent a lot of the movie going, what the fuck am I watching? What are they talking about? Yeah. And I don't know if it's that I'm just that old now, because maybe like 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been this old, and I maybe would have felt a little differently, but...
To be fair, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been this old. You'd have been 20 years younger.
Yeah, I would have been 28. So still probably not the demographic, but maybe a little closer. Maybe, within 10 years of how old these people were, sort of. Yeah, it was so strange to me. It was such a strange movie.
See, that's very interesting because I would think this is not... Now, I saw this in my early 20s. I feel like this is not a movie for people... that age. Like, this is not a movie for high schoolers. This is a movie for people our age who appreciate, like, one, weird cinema, and two, like, old school detective movies.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of, I think Johnson said in interviews, like, nothing about my movie was intended to capture what high school was like, but maybe it captured a little bit of what high school might have felt like while you were in it. Just this heightened reality that, bears no resemblance to anything objective, but it's just so emotional and intense and crazy all the time. And
heightened melodrama.
Yeah.
And I would I would believe that. I would subscribe to that. Yeah.
Robert, general thoughts about, because I know this wasn't your first time.
No, I think I saw it. I didn't see it when it first came out. I think it was maybe in 2009, 2010. So a couple of years later, I saw it. And the first time similar to Cara, I didn't really follow a lot of the chess pieces of like who's what and related to where, but I just enjoyed it so much as a style exercise. Just I loved Joseph Gordon-Levitt's performance, just how everybody commits to the bit, and just it's such a non-winking movie in itself in this mishmash of genres. So I still just enjoy it a lot as a ride. I think, like most noirs, it is so caught up in in style and performance and atmosphere that it does not go much deeper beneath the surface. So it is not my favorite film by Rian Johnson, but I still like it a lot.
I will agree with that. It's up there, though, among his movies. I have a lot of respect and a lot of love for Rian Johnson's films. I saw this... around 2008, 2009, and was in love with it immediately. And this was really before I had developed such a deep love and affection for the detective noir genre as a whole. It was just so unique. It is still so unique, but especially for the time it came out. there was nothing else out there like it. The closest thing was, like Robert said, Memento.
It's funny. The closest comparison to that I have was a cartoon that aired on, I want to say it was PBS back in the early 2000s. It was called Fillmore, and it was about the junior safety patrol at an elementary school. And so the lead characters are partners in the safety patrol who basically solve crimes in but it is the creators put so many cop show tropes into this series about like two kids figuring out who's stealing lunches from the cafeteria. And again, all played completely straight. Like their boss, Junior Commissioner Vallejo, is constantly having the principal just came into this office and told me that if you two can't figure out who's been, throwing watermelons in the parking spaces or whatever, it reminded me a lot of that. Obviously, it was on PBS, so content-wise, nowhere near Brick, but it's one of the only other places I've seen that really did that whole, we're just going to play this genre in a completely different context.
Yeah. For those who have not seen the movie, to give you a brief overview, it's about a man named Brendan who is trying to solve the murder of his girlfriend. And in the course of his investigation, he gets involved with the local drug kingpin, that kingpin's hot-headed bodyguard, the beautiful local femme fatale, another drug dealer, and his actress, sometimes girlfriend. Now, if you were to take all of that and just apply it to adults, that's most detective fiction. Now, take all of that and apply it to a high school. Brendan is 16, 17 years old. The oldest main character in the cast is the Pin, the local drug kingpin, who is, as a character points out, really old, like 26. One of my favorite lines in the movie. So that's where we're going to kick it off, is talking about high school noir and did it work? Did it not work? Did the same tropes apply? And we're going to start with Robert. What are your feelings about taking these stereotypical film noir cliches and transferring them into a high school setting?
I think Rian Johnson is very smart in his screenplay in figuring out what works and what's essential in the genre and what doesn't have to be moved over or made literal in how they do it. Like, for example, every time I describe this movie to people for a while, I would say, oh yeah, so it's about this guy who's like a detective in his high school, right? And then I watch it again, I'm like, well, no, not really. There's nothing that indicates that Brendan normally spends his time running around trying to solve mysteries or anything like that. It's just, we know of kind of two cases where he's got involved. It's ahead of the movie. He basically exposed a local drug dealer to try to protect his girlfriend at the time. And then there's all this, which he's only mixed up in because his girlfriend is dead. But it's just the way that Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays him with just the head down, shoulders forward drive of like the great, Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, just all the great gumshoes. It just immediately locks you into, okay, he's this kind of character without needing to actually put him in like a trench coat and a hat or have him have like a, solve mysteries 50 cents a day plus expenses sign hanging up in his garage. And that's just, as a whole, what I love about the movie is just knowing when to slide people into the style of it without being too literal in a way that I think would get too cutesy and too winky. Like it's just an incredible amount of judgment and affection for the genre and knowing what he moves over.
Cara, what are your thoughts?
So I don't even know how to as we were watching, I just, I kind of have a stream of consciousness of my thoughts in the moment. And it's kind of weird because some of it is things that I would probably say to someone, don't touch the body. Don't touch the body. Oh God, oh God, no, don't. Oh fuck. Yeah. I definitely can appreciate what went into it. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I think he's a good actor. And I liked him in that role. Some of it I just kept thinking, this is so strange. I don't know. It's just weird to me. I don't know.
No, I get it. And that's going to take us into our next discussion because these two are just going to piggyback off of each other. what are those tropes? Like, what are the film noir detective story kind of tropes? And if you really look at what all of these stories usually have in common, it's a particular kind of lingo.
Oh, God, yes.
Detectives and criminals would have.
So hard-boiled.
Yeah, that hard-boiled back and forth that you got, that made famous by people like Humphrey Bogart.
I did love the dialogue. Like that. I did like that a lot.
Heavy drinking, shady criminals. Oh, and a beat-up protagonist. Those are the centerpieces of any good detective fiction. The problem is when you take all that and apply it to a movie like Brick, especially one that goes so hard as Rian Johnson goes with this movie, you really need an encyclopedic knowledge, for this film in particular, of the works of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett.
And that might be why it fails with me.
It's also interesting. Obviously, that background gets a lot of attention, but apparently Johnson's also said that his visual style was pretty heavily influenced by anime, that he was a big fan of a lot of Japanese animation, specifically Cowboy Bebop, so that down to the point that the way Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character walks is influenced by the protagonist, Spike Spiegel, of that show. So, yeah, I agree. See what you're saying, that it is, like, it's such a love letter to a genre that I think is very well known. Everybody kind of has a sense of it, but it's so deep that, yeah, it can be a little alienating if you don't speak that language coming in. Seeing it applied in this other context is kind of doubly alienating.
Very much so. Like, I don't think they ever say the word cops. The police are exclusively referred to as the bulls, which is straight out of Dashiell Hammett. That is something that the Continental Op would say. And there's so many examples like that throughout the movie, but bulls is one that's always particularly stuck with me. The thing about transposing these two settings, the heavy drinking, that's such a cliche of, like, you know, crazy high school parties that I think is really fun turned on its head here, because they're not like these kids. At one point, Brendan goes to a party that the femme fatale character is throwing, but it's not like a wild rager.
She's like doing a spoken word piece at her piano.
Right. It's like he walked into a high school speakeasy kind of thing. It's just hilarious. But then you got like the shady criminal organizations. Yeah, there are high school drug dealers out there. I was friends with several of them in high school. I don't know about the two of you and what your friend groups were like when you were teenagers.
No.
I don't think anybody ever took me for the kind of person that would understand how to use drugs, so it'd be a waste of time selling them to me.
No, that's what's hilarious is I didn't actually ever smoke weed until I was in college, but I knew plenty of people who sold it in high school, and coke and oh yeah, a small southern town.
Small northern town, but damn.
Yeah. I mean, Cara, you grew up in California.
I'm also old. Well, yeah, but that was I was still in elementary in heading towards middle school for those years.
Oh, yeah,
So
I gotcha.
now high school probably would have been a very different story if I'd attended out there.
You didn't know any fifth grade coke dealers?
Not that I know of.
Robert, help me out here. This film takes place in Hermosa Beach, California, right? Or someplace?
Yeah, just sort of like a San Francisco area, just sort of Bayside town. It was the town that Rian Johnson grew up with. They actually filmed it at his high school. So,
Aww.
yeah, he didn't have studio backing for this. He funded it with like a loan from his parents. So, yeah, it was very much like, I need areas where I need places where I can call somebody who will let me film in their parking lot for a little bit. Yeah, so it's set in like the place where he actually grew up.
Nice. And the last one that I wrote down was the beat-up protagonist. If you reach the end of a detective story and the detective hasn't had this shit kicked out of him the whole thing, you've done it wrong. Or the storyteller has done it wrong. Going back and like reading the Continental Op stories or the Philip Marlowe stories, by the end of those, they have had the absolute shit kicked out of them. And here, by the end of the story, Brendan is sleep-deprived, has probably internal bleeding. He is passing out and falling over. You can really, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's performance here is so good because you could really get the sense that, oh, he's not doing well right now. He is powering through this by force of will alone. So when it comes to like taking those staples, I think you really can apply them, and I think they did really apply them really well for this film. I had forgotten about this until we got a little ways into the movie, but Emilie de Ravin is pregnant in this one too.
Yeah, it's not something we find out until about halfway through, but yeah, she was pregnant, and the identity of the father is ambiguous in this case, although we get a pretty strong indication that it was Brendan by the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. But yeah, she's... I would say... Who would you say has an unhappier life? Because her name in the movie is Emily as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Emily or Claire, because Claire ultimately comes out a little bit better, but man, she has a much longer run of hard luck than Emily has.
Well,
I think that's only because Emily died.
Yeah.
I mean, even barring Emily, the character, dying, Claire wasn't a high school heroin addict. Which Emily, the character, was like pretty badly off.
Getting manipulated by basically everybody she trusted.
Yeah.
Yeah, even by Brendan's character. Like, that's the whole point of the backstory with him and Jer. He was, manipulating her out of what he thinks is love, but it's just a sense of control over her.
One of the lines that hit me the hardest on this rewatch is because we don't have a flashback a lot to their time together, but at one point he's walking and we hear him remembering a conversation they have, and he screams at Emily, "You're the only thing that I love." And I'm just like, what a horrifying thing that must be to have someone say to you in that way. Like, obviously it did not go well for her when she went out on her own, but you get why she didn't want to stay with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a movie full of melodrama, that flashback scene is by and far the most melodramatic. Like, their blow up at the football field, I cringe whenever I watch it, just because it is so fucking hammy. But amidst all of this, all the murder and investigative intrigue, we get one of my favorite characters in the movie, which is the Pin's mom.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
So,
the one time that the movie kind of looks to the camera and smiles.
Yeah. So the kingpin, as I mentioned, is a 26-year-old local drug kingpin. Has got several people underneath him distributing heroin. Dresses exclusively in a long black cloak. It appears to be not like a trench coat, but a fucking cloak. Walks with a cane, dresses in all black.
Apparently his costume is that of Barnabas Collins from Dark Shadows.
Oh, 1,000%. Yes.
So,
yes.
It literally dressed like a vampire.
Yep.
Yes.
So midway through the movie, Brendan is talking to the Pin and Tug. The Pin's number 2 guy is like an enforcer. This like 18-year-old meathead. And they're having, their very intense noir conversation. And then the action moves upstairs to the Pin's kitchen, where his mom is serving Brendan orange juice and cereal and milk. And the movie just shifts so tonally in that moment that it is hilarious. And it really drives home how crazy what happened before this scene and what happens afterwards is. I love it. I mean, just you guys' thoughts on the Pin's mom.
I appreciate the silliness, like that wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of thing. I did.
You couldn't do that more than, I think, once. I think you only get one chance to do that, or else you've broken your own movie. But what perfect timing for that.
It really was. And it also kind of adds another level of horror to the end of the movie when things go horribly awry at the Pin's house, that his poor mother is just there amongst this gang shootout that happens in her home.
Presumably she's got to at least have some awareness that her son does not have usual 26-year-old hobbies. So,
well, that's kind of that's honestly the thought that I wrote down. I'm like, does mom know what's going on? Like, is she high all the time, or is she in on it, or like does she just? I think it's weird.
I think it's pretty clear she is not what you'd call a helicopter mom.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not.
It makes you think of the kind of the cliche in common in detective or most crime stories where, you find the gang boss, the big connected guy at the top of the criminal chain, And he get invited to his home, and he's got like this really smiling, loving wife. He might have a kid who runs up and is just like, oh, yeah, bringing toys to the protagonist. And it's this usual like, oh, this person's dangerous. They're into all this crime and bad stuff. But they've got this nice home life. And I feel like, yeah, instead of the Pin having a girlfriend, it's that he's got a mom who, loves him and, offers cereal and orange juice to his friends.
So it's like the mom in like most mafia movies.
Very much so, yeah.
Kind of Joe Pesci's mom in Goodfellas.
That's exactly what came to mind when you said that. Yes.
Yeah, very much so. The first thing that you asked, Cara, when we were done watching the movie was...
Oh, God, I don't remember. That was more than a day ago.
Yeah. You asked us, what just happened?
Oh, okay. Yeah, what the fuck? Yeah.
So having gone through this discussion, let's talk about what happened and break it down. And I'll tell you why. And again, why you need such an encyclopedic knowledge of detective fiction. Let me get a drink of water first before we dive into this.
There will be some verbalization here.
What was the little nerdy friend's name?
Brain. He's just called Brain.
Brain. There we go. Because I loved him.
There was a running fan theory about whether or not he actually exists. Because he's never seen talking to anybody other than Brendan. He never appears in a scene where anybody else is present. I don't quite buy the idea that he could be a figment, because he gives Brendan information that Brendan couldn't have. And at some points he's like following people and like keeping an eye out for things that Brendan is explicitly not able to do. Mm-hmm. But it's a fun dynamic, just because apparently some people have gone very far in trying to square that circle.
And it doesn't make sense either, because Brain is the one who picks up Laura at the end of the movie and brings her to the high school.
Yeah.
So if he didn't exist, then how did Laura get back to the school?
Magic.
Yeah.
So a convoluted plot is just a staple of detective fiction, to the point where one of my absolute favorite stories is like a behind-the-scenes making of kind of story. The first time that they adapted Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep on film in the 1930s, starring Humphrey Bogart, there is a subplot in the book where one of the antagonists, his driver, is found dead in his car that has been pushed into a river. And that is part of the main character, Philip Marlowe's investigation. But it's ultimately a red herring. It never goes anywhere. Red herrings are essential to these sort of detective plots. So in adapting this film, the director called Raymond Chandler up on the phone and asked him, so who killed the driver then? And Chandler was like, oh, I have no idea. It's just part of the plot. It's what happened. It's another beat along the investigation, but ultimately it didn't matter to the story whatsoever. And in constructing the plot of Brick, Rian Johnson made an incredibly convoluted plot that is relatively easy to understand. It just has so many pieces and players involved in it. So that's what I want to wrap up here. Me and Robert, like walking through the plot of not just the movie, but the plot of like what came before Brendan's investigation and ultimately who did what and where.
Yeah, because I think
That would be great.
Part of what makes it so convoluted is, of course, it's not like we get one scene of exposition laying it out. The story is Brendan figuring out the big story. So what's actually happening is tied up with the story of him fighting it. And it's hard to, like, those pieces all get kind of mingled together.
Mm-hmm. And the majority of it is his, the classic detective giving the speech to the culprit monologue at the end. But Robert, help me out here. Jump in whenever I miss something or fuck something up, because I've seen this movie so many times, I could have it wrong too.
I've got the Wikipedia summary pulled up, just double checking as we go.
There we go. So prior to the start of the movie, Brendan and Emily were in a relationship, and Brendan and a boy named Jer, another teenager, were running some kind of drug business together, presumably dealing weed. Like, they were very low time, low stakes.
Not to immediately fork off on this, were they in business together, or did Brendan explicitly get into business with him with the intention of taking him down? when he started selling his stuff to Emily, because one way or the other he rats out Jer to the vice principal, who's the only other adult in the movie besides the Penn's mom, and that's part of why Emily left him.
Played by Shaft himself, Richard Roundtree, as the vice principal. But so I was under the impression from the movie that Jer and Brendan were in business together. But either way, Emily and Jer started getting close, but presumably because Jer was encouraging or helping Emily get heroin. And in any case, he was directly involved in running out her addiction, which is what inspired Brendan to rat on him and go into a collaboration with the vice principal to set up basically a sting to catch Jer.
Another one of my favorite lines is when he tells the principal, "I did that to see him get eaten, not to see you get fed."
Yes.
That was a good one.
Yes. Emily did not take this well, probably for several reasons, one of which is now one of her sources of heroin is gone, and two, because Brendan overstepped his boundaries in trying to control her. So the two of them break up. I think they say it's been 3 months, right?
Yeah.
So 3 months later...
Who's she eating lunch with now?
Yes. 3 months later, Emily has made friends with she's trying to ingratiate herself with two different groups of people. There is the Penn and Tug, and by extension, Laura, the femme fatale character in the movie. And then there's the other group, the aforementioned...
Dode and the Hopheads, they call them?
Yeah, Dode and the Hopheads, and Cara, the actress. That one should be easy to remember.
Haha.
All of this under the pretense of like making new friend groups, but probably also to get more heroin. At the beginning of the film, when the story proper starts, she calls...
She calls Brendan...
Yeah, she leaves a note for him at his locker to be at a payphone, which you couldn't really do anymore in what's about to be 2025. But she calls him on a payphone. She's in a panic. She says a lot of things that he doesn't understand. Like she mentions the Penn, Tug.
There was a bad brick.
A bad brick, poor Frisco. And while they're talking, a fucking gorgeous all-black 65 Mustang drives by. Somebody flicks a cigarette out the window with a very distinctive logo on the filter. Well, that is an arrow pointing up. Brendan tries to figure out what's going on, why she was panicking. He meets with her, steals her journal, pickpockets it off of her, finds an invitation to a party, which he connects via Cara, the high school theater actress, at Laura's parents' mansion.
So the first chunk of this movie is just him trying to locate her and finish their conversation, figure out what she was talking about. And so that is sort of the first leg of his detective journey up to this point. Emily is presumably not dead for... we know she's not dead because eventually they do have one more conversation.
Yes. So Brennan goes to Laura's party that night, where he sees her new boyfriend, Laura's boyfriend, Brad Bramish, because you got to have that nice douchey alliterative name in there. And he follows Laura outside where he sees her meet with Tug, the perpetual white tank top wearing meathead. And Tug and Laura are having a very tense conversation when he drives off alone. Now, knowing what you know by the end of the movie, the conversation was probably Tug trying to get Laura to go with him. Because at this point in the story, a brick of heroin has gone missing and then been returned back to the Penn. But when one of the Penn's associates tried to shoot some of it up, he overdosed and is now in the hospital. That would be poor Frisco.
Yeah. So the implication being that somebody cut a chunk of it out, was trying to use it, and replaced it with something else that, when it got used, was toxic. So basically they cut it with something to try to hide what they'd taken out of it before returning.
Yep. And the number one suspect is heroin addict Emily, which is why she is in such a panic, because she thinks that the car she saw passing was driven by Tug. It's his Mustang, with, she presumes, the Penn in the passenger seat. It was actually Laura in the passenger seat out looking for her with Tug because it was her cigarette that Brendan found.
So what we find out is essentially that Laura is basically masterminding this conflict between Tug and the pin. Not to jump ahead, but that's all of her actions are kind of understood in that way, that she is manipulating Tug, manipulating the pin, and as soon as she figures out Brendan is involved in this, she's also trying to use him against them, because get everybody to take everybody else out. When she's the last one standing, she's in control of everything.
Right. She either wants to take over or wants to profit off of the heroin business, which is why she's the one who stole the brick and cut it and then sold half of it, presumably replaced it with whatever you want to call that. Like the what she replaced it with was toxic.
Yeah.
Brendan finally figures out there's a really ominous note that he gets that's supposed to be a location. He can't figure it out until he finally figures out that's the aqueduct. It's an aqueduct. Goes there early the next morning, finds Emilie dead. There is somebody waiting inside the aqueduct in the shadows. Brendan chases after that person, gets knocked out, wakes up, the person's gone. That person was Tug.
Yeah. So what we find out eventually is that Emilie was pregnant. There were at least 3 people who could have potentially been the father, because she'd been involved with Brendan, she'd been involved with Tug, and she'd been involved with Dode. Dode believed the kid was his. Laura presumably figured out that it was Brendan, but basically to cover her own tracks with the brick, she told Emilie to go to Tug and tell him
It was his baby.
Yeah. And because she knew Tug well enough to know he would freak out, get violent, and kill her, but she deliberately manipulated Emilie to do it because it would be easier to pin the missing brick on her once she was dead. So that's her ruthlessness there.
That's what kicks off the rest of Brendan's investigation. That's what leads him to ingratiate himself with the pin, which is where he finds out about how the pin came into possession of 10 bricks of heroin, 8 of which he sold off, 1 of which he still has, and 1 that was stolen and then returned bad. So that is the plot of the movie right there.
And then everything else is just Brendan also trying to play the two off each other because he knows he can get them to take each other out, not realizing that Laura is planning to do the same thing while also shoving him into the mix too.
Literally everything else that happens in the movie is just a long series of red herrings. Cara, the actress, had nothing to do with Emilie's death. She had just been kind of stringing Emilie along as a friend. Dode had nothing to do with her death. He was in love with her and thought that he was the father of the kid, which ultimately ends up getting him killed.
Because he found Emilie's body as well and saw Brendan hide the body. So he assumed Brendan had also killed her because he didn't actually see her death. When he tries, but he basically tries to, threaten
Blackmail.
Brendan. Yeah, blackmail Brendan by going to the pen and being like, I know who killed this girl. And he's making all these insinuations with Brendan standing right there, not realizing that Tug, who's also there, is going to assume that Dode is about to rat him out. And that's what prompts Dode to pull his gun and shoot Dode right there, as he assumes...
Tug
pulls his gun and shoots Dode because he thinks Dode is about to rat him out, when in fact Dode had no idea.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly unfortunate choice of wording on his part that gets him killed.
He literally, he's trying to extort money out of the pin, and he tells him the person who did it is very, very close to you. He says, as Tug is standing right next to the pin. The assassin that goes after Brendan, another red herring you find out at the end of the movie. That assassin was hired by Brad Bramish because Brendan beat him up as part of his way of trying to get to the pin. So the only 2 players in the entire movie that were directly involved in Laura's murder were Tug and Laura. And
You mean Emily's murder?
Emily's murder. Yeah, sorry. There's so many names.
Yeah.
in this
I know.
movie. Yeah. Everything else was just a byproduct of it.
It's just essentially the dust that Brandon is kicking up as he tries to figure out what's going on. Just stuff keeps blowing back on him. That he picks a fight with Brad, just mainly to shake some things loose, but then Brad later has someone try to stab him.
And because of Laura's machinations, Brendan plays pretty much right into her hand and helps further the divide between Penn and the Tug, which ends with the two of them, they're both factions going to war with each other, both of them dying in a shootout.
Yeah. So Brendan's plan was to basically get everybody in one location, and then he'd hidden Emily's body. He gets it out. He's going to plant it in Tug's car and then call the police to that location. So his plan is just everybody there gets arrested in one place. There's a corpse in the car. That wraps things up for him. Laura, meanwhile, because the whole thing was them, I'm not sure if Laura knew it would go this way or she took steps to make it go this way. Laura was counting on things going bad at that meeting, that it would escalate to a violent point before anybody else got there and the people would just end up dead. I think she would have been fine with people getting arrested too, but...
Yeah, well, there's still the question of the 10th brick, the final one. Is it pure or is it fucked up as well? So Brendan rather idiotically agrees to take a dose off the top of it. He's going to shoot up with it to prove that it is still good and that the Penn and Tug, I think the idea was they split the profits from the sale of it.
Yeah, they were trying to negotiate something, but the Penn wasn't satisfied that what was returned was still going to be good. So at first he wanted Tug to do it, and I think Brendan might have done that because he was like, he'd rather play roulette himself than just have things explode into violence right then and there while he's in the room. But that ends up happening anyway.
Yeah, because Laura at some point stole the final brick herself, which they later find in her locker at the high school, which all leads, once the dust has settled, to the last confrontation between Brendan and Laura, in which he lays out everything that happened and accuses her of her involvement, which he doesn't outright confirm for him, but the fact that the police find the brick in her locker is confirmation enough. And before they part ways, she pretty much confirms for him that it was his baby, because Emily was 3 months along. And
she was planning to get an abortion.
Mm-hmm. And then she whispers something in his ear before she walks away. I love this ending so much because after she's gone, Brain asks Brendan, what did she say to you? And Robert, you might have to help me out with the exact wording, but I'm pretty sure he says she called me a dirty word.
Yeah.
Which, in and of itself, the reason I put this here in the notes, this is one of the most obscure references I've seen in a movie before. This is from the end of Dashiell Hammett's The Girl with the Silver Eyes. She put her mouth close to my ear so that her breath was warm again on my cheek, as it had been in the car, and whispered the vilest epithet of which the English language is capable. Which, if we got the closed captioning on in the movie, you can see the first part of it, mother. She called him a motherfucker before she walked away. So there you go. Any questions?
Honestly, I would have loved to have known all of that going into the movie, but not known it so that
to have like a whiteboard that like fills in as the movie goes.
Yes, or like I pause and like, okay, you're gonna make these notes and draw these lines and sort of do like what we used to do with our murder board.
Yeah,
I could have used that. That would have been very helpful because I didn't know some of that. I didn't pick up on some of that stuff, and I'm like, oh.
It's another interesting thing in noirs that what the villain is doing tends to be pretty straightforward. Like, Chinatown is all about just, water rights, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit is about, property ownership. And this is ultimately about control of a drug trade. But just the road to finding that out and just the human element of just who's fighting to control what is what makes it such a labyrinth. Mm-hmm. So that's why, most great noirs do take a second watch, or you have to go find a plot summary, because it can be hard to catch all the pieces on one viewing.
But now that you know, the next time you watch it, Cara, it should be crystal clear, right?
I don't know that it'll be crystal clear, but honestly, like having you guys sort of lay it out, it made me want to go, I could watch that again and see if I could understand it a little bit better, and maybe start to like it.
It's a lot of plot to get to. Basically, Laura did it.
Yeah.
With the help of Tug.
Yeah.
Everything else, red herring.
Yeah, I hate those damn red herrings.
Yeah, me too. No, I'm kidding. I love them. They're an essential part of the genre.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Final thoughts before we wrap up our discussion about Brick. I'll just go ahead and say I love this movie so much, but I understand why it is such a niche film for people. Yeah, Cara.
I don't know that I will ever feel the way you do about it, but I am absolutely willing to watch it again and give it, I don't want to say the old college try, because that was the first time. I would like to give it its due, because I didn't hate it. It didn't strike any chords for me initially, but I think it's because it was so confusing for my old ass brain.
That's fair. Robert, final thoughts about Brick?
It is just nice to have someone share something they love with you. And every time I watch Brick, I'm just like, man, I could see all of the movies and stories that Rian Johnson just loved so much that he poured into this thing. So ranking it among his films, I would definitely put Looper ahead of it, probably Knives Out and The Last Jedi. Maybe The Last Jedi. I don't know. I could see these two jockeying for it. But it's just, for the first film this guy made as a writer and director, and just knowing like what resources he had when he made it, it is just an incredible achievement. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
I loved Looper.
Yeah, like I said, that's my favorite of his works, because I think it's got more of an emotional heart than this one does, which again, by design, like we said, noir is a genre that's very much about like the surface and the atmosphere, and it's a little too cynical to have too much thematic depth apart from just general human depravity and corruption. But man, yeah, just such a great movie. And you see why this kind of also catapulted Joseph Gordon-Levitt into his adult stardom after being, a child actor for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yeah. If I had to rank them, I mean, Knives Out is very similar in that it falls into the detective fiction genre, but it is much more mainstream and less convoluted than Brick is. I would say that's probably my favorite of Rian Johnson's films, followed by, it's tied with The Last Jedi, but because that's just the Star Wars fan in me. And I think The Last Jedi, contrary to a lot of the fandom's belief, is like top 3 Star Wars. And then it would be this, and then Looper.
I think The Last Jedi has its flaws, but it is the only one of the sequel films that was trying to do a single damned interesting thing. That it's about something beyond just how awesome it is to be a fan of Star Wars, which puts it so far ahead of The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker that it's not even funny.
Agreed. Well, that is going to be the last episode of Long Walk Talks for 2024. We're going to be taking a hiatus for the rest of December. We will probably, the three of us, start watching season 2 of Lost together pretty soon. We are, however, all three of us currently in a show. So balancing watching Lost with rehearsal is going to make for some fun content. For new listeners, this episode was supposed to have come out 2 weeks ago. For old listeners, you know that our rehearsal schedule is flexible at best. Sometimes we make our release dates, sometimes we don't. That's life, and all of us have full-time jobs. If we're all getting paid to podcast, we'd always be on time, but here we are. So until then, Robert, you made the transition over to Blue Sky, right?
Yes, indeed. I'm liking it so far, slowly building up kind of following. I think I might give this one a couple of months, and if I like it, cool. If not, I might try jumping over to Threads, see how that goes. But for right now, I am at RedbeardRob17 on Blue Sky or Blueski.
Still have no idea which one it's supposed to be. Cara, are you on any social media that you'd like to promote?
No, but I might check out Threads while you check out Blue Sky, Blueski.
Nice.
Blueski.
Whichever. If you want to reach out to me online or follow me online, the best place to do that is still on Instagram at DB Hensley. If you want to keep up with Long Walk Productions, you can visit us online at longwalk.us. To see more of our original work or hear past episodes that are no longer streaming, you can follow the YouTube links in the show notes. Thank you very much for listening, and if you enjoy the show or any of the shows on the Long Walk Podcast Network, please make sure to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you are listening on. From all of us here at Long Walk Productions and Long Walk Podcasts, happy holidays, everybody.
See you in 2025.
Enjoy the last few days of the year.
See you next year.